They followed a shy girl on Christmas Day. What the Alpha King found later shocked the board. The castle stood like a silent giant, its towers piercing the gray winter sky, and the smell of pine and candlelight drifted through the corridors. Christmas Day had arrived, but inside the halls of the royal court there was little cheer. Behind the glittering decorations and cheerful lights, the palace carried secrets, whispers, and ambitions sharper than any sword. Ilara moved quietly down the long hall of the archives. Her footsteps barely made a sound on the polished marble floor. She always tried to stay invisible, blending into the shadows of the palace. The young girl had worked there for 3 years, quietly organizing scrolls, reading texts that no one else cared for, and keeping her head low. Her soft brown hair was tied back, her hands always clean from ink or dust. People often overlooked her, which suited her fine. She liked her quiet life, her small tasks, and the faint hum of magic she sometimes felt in the air. Yet today, something felt different. The usual warmth of the candles seemed colder, the air thicker with tension. She had heard whispers outside the archives, voices talking in low tones, too hurried to understand. She paused by a tall shelf of ancient books, fingering the spine of a leather-bound tome. Then came the heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. "Ilara," a voice called sharply. It was Lord Raven, the head of the Board of Ministers. His face was cold and his eyes measured hers like one measures a prize or a threat. "The board has made a decision." Ilara's heart tightened. She had always known she was different, and she had always feared that one day her differences would make her unwelcome. She swallowed hard and lifted her gaze. "You are dismissed," Lord Raven said, his words sharp and final, effective immediately. Ilara blinked. "Dismissed?" she asked softly, almost not daring to speak. "But you may gather your things," he interrupted, "and take your leave. The king has no need for timid girls in his court during these times." Her hands trembled. The words cut deeper than she expected. Dismissal was one thing, humiliation was another. She had worked for years, quietly, helping where no one else wanted to tread, and now she was being thrown out on Christmas Day like a discarded ornament. As she gathered her few possessions, a small satchel, her notes, and a single silver pen that had been given to her as a gift from a long-gone mentor, Ilara's mind raced. She felt anger, yes, but mostly a deep sadness, a sense of being unseen and undervalued. She turned from the archives and stepped into the snow outside, feeling the cold bite of winter against her cheeks. She walked without a destination, letting the snowflakes cling to her hair and coat. The streets of the capital were bustling with celebration, children laughing, merchants calling their wares, but it all felt distant, like a world she could no longer touch. Eventually, she found herself at the edge of the forest near the river, where the wind whispered through the trees. Here she could breathe, and here she could think. Little did she know, someone was watching. From the shadows of a high balcony in the palace, King Eric's sharp eyes followed her. He was tall and commanding, with the presence of a predator and the elegance of a prince, yet he carried the weight of a king who had long suffered betrayal and solitude. His silver hair gleamed faintly in the pale winter light, and his expression was unreadable. He had not sent for her, had barely noticed her presence in the palace before, yet today, the flicker of something unusual, something powerful yet restrained, caught his attention. The quiet girl, trembling in the snow, seemed to carry a light in her chest that neither frost nor fear could snuff out. Inside the council chambers, the Board of Ministers continued their meetings, celebrating their small victory. They had rid the court of the shy girl, or so they thought, but Eric's mind was elsewhere. He could not ignore the strange pull he felt toward someone so unassuming. He wondered why the palace itself seemed quieter when she was gone, why the shadows of the archives felt emptier. Meanwhile, Ilara trudged back toward the village at the edge of the kingdom. She had nowhere to go, no friends to turn to, only the small village of outcasts who sometimes traded with the palace. The villagers welcomed her, offering warm food and a place to rest, but she could not shake the feeling that her life in the palace had only begun to change, not ended. That night, as she sat by the fire in a small cottage, she unrolled her notes and sketches. She had been documenting old prophecies and tales of magic hidden in the castle's walls. Among the mundane, she had uncovered hints of a curse tied to the royal family, whispers of ancient betrayal, and warnings that spoke directly to her line of sight, warnings that now made her heart pound with fear. She was not merely a timid girl thrown out of a job. She was, unknowingly, part of something far larger, a puzzle that had been waiting for her to see it. Her fingers trembled as she traced the symbols in her notes, a faint glow of power responding to her touch. Magic had always been faintly present in her life, but she had ignored it, afraid of attention. Now it was impossible to ignore. Back in the palace, Eric could not rest. He wandered the halls, silent and imposing, until he reached the archives. The shelves stood empty where Alara's presence had once lingered. His hand brushed against a shelf where a book had been moved, and beneath it he noticed a small, folded letter. Curious, he picked it up. The letter was in delicate handwriting, the words flowing with careful urgency. To the one who bears the crown, beware the frost that comes not from winter, but from blood. The curse grows stronger each year. Only the one who sees the hidden path may save what is beloved. Trust no one and yet find the courage to trust. Eric's eyes narrowed. The letter was unsigned, yet he felt a strange certainty that Alara had written it. He did not know how she had come to know such things, but he sensed in her words a truth he could not ignore. The board had dismissed her, but the palace itself seemed to whisper her name. As he stood in the quiet of the archives, snow falling softly outside, Eric realized that this small, shy girl, dismissed and overlooked, might hold the key to something far greater than either of them could imagine. The quiet pull in his chest grew stronger, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something he could not yet name. Alara, unaware of the king's discovery, slept fitfully by the fire, dreaming of shadows moving in the palace halls and a voice calling her name. Her heart beat with a mixture of fear and determination. She had been cast out, humiliated and alone, but something in the air had changed. Something in her own blood had awakened. And as the night deepened, a distant howl echoed through the snowy forest, sharp and haunting, as if the kingdom itself had noticed the stirrings of magic. Somewhere in the vast halls of the palace, Eric held the letter tightly, his mind racing. Tomorrow would not be like today. The quiet girl who had been fired would not remain invisible. And in that quiet, snowy night, a thread of fate began to pull them together, winding tightly around the hearts of the shy girl and the Alpha King, preparing a story that neither would forget. The morning sun fell weakly through the gray clouds, casting pale light over the snow-covered kingdom. In the village at the edge of the forest, Alara stirred awake, the fire crackling beside her. Her dreams had been restless, filled with shadowy figures and a voice whispering warnings. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the visions, but deep inside she knew they were real. The palace, her former life, and the strange letter in the king's hand were all connected. Alara had always been shy, always careful to stay invisible. Yet now, she felt a strange pull toward the palace, toward the very place that had cast her aside. The snow outside glimmered in the weak sunlight, as though urging her forward. She wrapped herself in her cloak and stepped into the crisp winter air, feeling the cold bite her cheeks, but also a flicker of courage she had never felt before. Meanwhile, in the palace, King Eric could not rest. The letter Alara had left behind burned in his thoughts. His steps were quiet on the marble floors, but his mind raced with questions. Who was this girl? How did she know of the curse that had haunted his family for generations? And why, despite her dismissal, did he feel an unexplainable pull toward her? The castle itself seemed to sense the change. The walls, usually cold and unyielding, shivered as if warning him. Shadows moved where no one should have been, and the frost that had begun in the northern towers crept closer to the heart of the castle. The curse, long dormant, was waking. Eric's advisor, Lord Raven, entered the room abruptly. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling, "something is wrong in the archives. There are frost marks where they should not be. And the candles, they burn strangely, shapes, moving shadows." Eric's gaze sharpened. He did not need explanation. He had sensed the change himself. The board had dismissed Elara, thinking her insignificant, but her presence, or perhaps her absence, was stirring something powerful. Without hesitation, Eric donned his heavy cloak and left the castle, riding swiftly toward the village at the forest's edge. His horse's hooves beat against the snow-covered ground, echoing through the silent woods. For the first time in years, he felt unsettled, not from danger in battle, but from the unknown force of a girl he barely knew. Elara was tending a small fire in the village square when she noticed the figure approaching through the drifting snow. The horseman moved with authority and presence, a striking figure even at a distance. Her heart skipped a beat. She had seen kings in books, portraits, and stories, but never thought she would face one herself. As he dismounted, the villagers stepped aside, murmuring in awe. Eric approached slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "Elara," he said, his voice deep and commanding, yet not unkind, "I need to speak with you." Elara's hands trembled. She had expected anger, dismissal, or indifference. She had not expected concern or curiosity from a king. Yet something in his gaze made her cautious and curious at the same time. Why do you need me?" she asked softly. "Because," Eric replied, "there is a darkness awakening in the palace, a curse tied to my family, and I believe you know more than you realize." Elara's breath caught. She had always feared her knowledge, had always kept it secret, worried others would think her strange. But now, standing before the king, she realized that her quiet observations, her notes, and even her visions might be needed. Together, they rode back toward the palace. The wind howled around them, and the snow fell heavier as if the elements themselves were warning them. Elara sat stiffly on her horse, her hands gripping the reins, but her mind was alert. She felt a strange energy building inside her, a flicker of magic she had never fully understood, now awakening with urgency. Upon their arrival, the palace appeared different. The frost had spread further than ever before, creeping along the walls and staircases, coating the tapestries with a silvery sheen. Shadows danced where light should have fallen, and the air felt heavier, charged with tension. Eric led Elara to the heart of the archives. The shelves, once familiar, now seemed alive, humming faintly with the energy of the curse. Elara approached a large, ancient tome, its cover etched with symbols that shimmered faintly. As she opened it, the frost retreated slightly, as if recognizing her touch. "The curse," she whispered, tracing her fingers over the markings, "it grows stronger when ignored, when dismissed. It feeds on fear, secrecy, and betrayal, and it's coming back now." Eric leaned close, studying her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, yet there was determination there too. "How do we stop it?" he asked. Elara hesitated. She had studied the warnings, the prophecies, and the ancient texts, but the solution was never simple. "There is a way," she said finally, "but it will require both courage and trust. We must act before it reaches the heart of the kingdom." As they spoke, the frost shifted again, forming shapes on the walls, ghostly figures, twisted and sorrowful. The palace seemed to groan under their presence. Eric's jaw tightened. He had faced many threats, rebellions, traitors, and invaders, but nothing had unsettled him like this. Elara stepped forward, her hand raised as if to command the very air. Her voice, soft but firm, carried through the archives. "You cannot fight this with swords alone. It is ancient, older than our bloodlines. You must listen, follow, and trust." Eric studied her, his eyes narrowing. Her small frame seemed fragile, yet her presence commanded the room. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Power and fear coexisted in her, and he found himself drawn to both. The day passed as they moved through the castle, investigating the areas most affected by the frost and shadows. Alara's knowledge of the hidden paths, secret rooms, and forgotten texts guided them. She led Eric to a chamber where the frost formed a frozen circle on the floor, etched with runes that pulsed faintly with blue light. "This is a ward," she explained. "A seal placed centuries ago, but it weakens every year. If it breaks completely, the curse will spread through the castle and beyond." Eric knelt beside her, examining the runes. "And only you can restore it?" he asked, not as a question of doubt, but of necessity. Alara nodded. "I can, but I must be brave. I must face what the curse shows me, what the palace itself fears, and I cannot do it alone." For a moment they were silent, the weight of destiny pressing on them. The snow outside continued to fall, piling against the castle walls, muffling the world beyond. Inside, the flickering torches cast moving shadows, and every corner seemed alive with unseen eyes. Suddenly, a chill wind blew through the chamber, extinguishing the torches. The frost on the floor glimmered, forming shapes of past kings and queens, their faces twisted with sorrow. Eric stepped protectively in front of Alara. "They are warning us," she whispered, "of what happens if we fail." Eric placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We will not fail," he said, though inside doubt gnawed at him. This was a curse older than his reign, more cunning than any enemy he had faced. And yet he trusted her, not just because of her knowledge, but because her courage shone where fear should have blinded her. The chamber grew colder. Frost spread along the walls and ceiling, and ghostly whispers echoed around them. Eric and Alara held their ground, standing together, two figures against the awakening darkness. As the day gave way to evening, they retreated to a high balcony overlooking the snow-covered grounds. Alara wrapped herself in her cloak, shivering, but her eyes were bright with purpose. Eric stood beside her, silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The curse," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "it will not wait. Tomorrow it will strike again. And next time it may not be so easy to contain." Eric nodded. "Then we prepare, we face it together. And no one, not the board, not the shadows, not even fate itself, will stop us." Alara looked up at him, her heart beating fast. She had been dismissed, cast aside, and told she did not belong. Yet here she was, standing beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, facing a darkness that threatened all they loved. And for the first time, she felt she mattered. A sudden gust of wind swept past them, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. The palace shivered and frost formed shapes on the balcony railing, shapes of those who had fallen to the curse before. Alara's eyes widened. "It knows we are here," she said softly. Eric's jaw tightened. "Then we must be ready," he said. His hand brushed hers, a gesture both protective and grounding. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As the first stars appeared in the cold winter sky, the shadows in the palace deepened and the frost continued to creep. Alara and Eric, unlikely allies bound by fate, had taken the first step into a story that neither of them could have imagined. The morning arrived gray and cold, heavy clouds hanging low over the palace. The frost had not melted overnight. Instead, it had grown thicker, creeping along the walls and floors, curling around doorframes like silent fingers. Inside, the grand halls felt different. The warmth of torches and candles barely reached the icy corners, and whispers echoed, though no one was there. Alara walked carefully through the corridors, her breath forming tiny clouds in the cold air. The visions she had seen in her dreams lingered in her mind, the frost spreading faster, ghostly faces appearing in the walls, and whispers in languages she could not understand. Yet now, standing in the heart of the palace, she felt something stronger than fear: purpose. King Eric had been by her side since the previous day, moving silently, his presence commanding yet protective. He had begun to trust her instincts, even when they led him to strange and hidden places within the castle. Together, they had discovered chambers sealed for centuries, secret passageways and forgotten rooms where the walls themselves seemed alive with magic. "You are certain about this?" Eric asked, his voice low, almost reverent. They were standing before a massive wooden door, carved with symbols that glimmered faintly under the torchlight. Ilara nodded. "I am certain. Behind this door lies the source of the curse, or at least what is left of it. The palace has been its home for generations, and only by confronting it directly can we hope to end it." Eric's eyes softened as he studied her. She was still the shy girl the board had dismissed, yet there was a quiet strength in her posture, a calm determination that demanded respect. "Then we face it together," he said. The door groaned as they pushed it open, revealing a chamber unlike any other. The air was colder here, and frost covered the floor in intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. Symbols glowed faintly along the walls, and the shadows shifted unnaturally, as though the room were breathing. Ilara stepped inside, her hand brushing along the frost-covered wall, feeling the faint pulse of magic beneath her fingertips. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where it all began." The chamber seemed to respond to her words. Frost spread rapidly across the floor, forming shapes that resembled faces and hands reaching toward them. The whispers grew louder, echoing in a language Ilara did not understand. She felt her heart race, her body trembling, yet she did not turn away. She had been dismissed, ignored, and belittled, but now she realized her presence here was necessary. She could not fail. Eric stepped closer, his hand brushing hers briefly in a gesture of reassurance. "We will not fail," he said firmly. "Whatever this is, whatever waits for us, we face it together." Ilara nodded, drawing a deep breath. She closed her eyes and focused, reaching into herself, into the knowledge and intuition she had always tried to ignore. The frost and shadows responded, shifting and writhing as though acknowledging her command. Then, without warning, the room shook. A chilling wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the torches. Frost formed shapes in the darkness, ancient kings and queens, their faces twisted with sorrow and anger. They moved toward them, their whispers growing into a deafening chorus. Ilara opened her eyes, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "I know you," she said to the figures. "I know what you want. I know why you are trapped here, and I will help you rest, but you must let us act. You must let us end this." The shadows hesitated, as if considering her words. Eric watched silently, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, ready to defend her if needed. Yet he trusted her judgment more than he had trusted anyone in years. Slowly the frost began to recede, curling away from them, revealing the center of the chamber, a pedestal carved from black stone. Upon it lay a small, glowing crystal, pulsating with cold light. Ilara approached it carefully, feeling the ancient power radiating from it. "This is the heart of the curse," she said. "Destroying it is not enough. It must be contained, redirected, or it will return. The magic here is bound to the royal bloodline and to me." Eric's eyes narrowed. "To you," Ilara nodded. "Yes. I am part of the line that has always been tasked with guarding against this curse. My ancestors were keepers of the seal, protectors of the palace. That is why I was drawn here, even when the board tried to dismiss me. This was never just a job for me. It is my destiny." Eric's chest tightened. For so long he had ruled alone, believing in strength, strategy, and discipline. He had never allowed himself to hope for allies he could trust completely. Yet here, beside this quiet, brave girl, he felt the stirrings of something he had never expected: hope, and a connection that ran deeper than words. Ilara placed her hands on the crystal, feeling its icy pulse against her skin. The shadows around them shifted, reaching toward her, as if testing her resolve. She closed her eyes and focused, drawing upon every ounce of courage, every lesson she had learned in her quiet life, every whisper of magic she had sensed but never claimed. The crystal shuddered and frost spread in a circle around her. The whispers became screams, then fell silent, leaving only a deep, resonant hum. Eric watched, awe and fear mingling in his chest, as Alara's face glowed faintly with light. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Then, with a final, trembling breath, Alara lifted her hands from the crystal. The frost receded completely, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. The chamber was silent. The weight of the curse had lifted, replaced by a strange, peaceful energy. Eric stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice soft, almost in disbelief. "You saved the palace. You saved the kingdom." Alara's knees trembled and she sank to the floor, exhausted but relieved. "It's not over," she whispered. "The magic, it is tied to me. I will carry it always. But for now, it is contained." Eric knelt beside her, lifting her carefully. "Then we face it together," he said again, his words no longer just a promise but a truth. In that moment, the walls of the palace seemed to sigh in relief, and the cold air felt warmer, as if the building itself were grateful. For the first time, Alara looked at Eric not as a king, not as a figure of authority, but as a companion, a partner, someone who understood the weight of destiny and the burden of courage. She saw in him not just power, but the possibility of trust, of connection, of something that had been missing in both their lives. Yet even in the calm, the palace whispered warnings. The frost may have receded, but the magic was not gone. It pulsed faintly, bound to Alara, waiting, reminding them that the world they had known was fragile. Eric understood this, and he tightened his hold on her hand, silently promising protection, partnership, and faith. That evening, the council convened in the grand hall. The ministers, unaware of the events in the hidden chamber, continued their petty discussions and schemes. Eric's presence was commanding, yet his eyes carried a new focus, a new understanding. He no longer feared the unknown. He had faced it, guided by someone who had once been dismissed as weak. Alara remained in the shadows at his side, observing, learning, and standing quietly. She was no longer just a shy girl. She had faced the darkness, confronted ancient power, and emerged stronger. The palace had changed, and she had changed with it. A sudden movement in the hall drew their attention. Lord Raven stepped forward, a document in hand, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth, "we must discuss the girl who claims knowledge of the curse. Her presence, her influence, it cannot be ignored." Eric's gaze hardened, and he stepped forward, placing himself between Alara and the council. "She will remain," he said, his voice carrying through the hall like a command of thunder, "and her knowledge will guide us. The palace has been threatened, and she has proven herself. That is all you need to know." The ministers whispered among themselves, uneasy and shocked. They had dismissed her, ignored her, even mocked her. And now she stood at the side of the king, her presence unyielding, her power undeniable. Alara felt a mixture of pride, relief, and a quiet fear. She had won this battle, but the world was still vast, still full of magic, still full of challenges. And yet she no longer faced them alone. Eric's hand rested lightly on hers, a steady, reassuring presence. As night fell, the palace was quiet. Snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in white silence. Alara stood on a balcony, gazing at the horizon, feeling the weight of her destiny and the warmth of newfound trust. Eric joined her, standing close, silent, letting the moment linger. "The curse is contained," he said softly, "but the kingdom will always need guardians. And so will I." Alara smiled faintly, her breath visible in the cold air. "Then we face it together," she repeated, echoing the promise they had made in the chamber. And in that quiet winter night, the palace seemed to breathe again. Shadows no longer whispered threats, frost no longer moved with malice, but the story was not finished. The past lingered, the magic pulsed, and the bond between the shy girl and the Alpha King grew stronger, ready to face whatever awaited next. The kingdom woke to a sky streaked with frost and pale sunlight, but the air carried an uneasy tension. Though the immediate threat of the curse had been contained, the palace still trembled beneath the weight of ancient magic. Winter winds swept through the empty courtyards, rattling the gates, and the shadows of the corridors seemed to linger longer than usual. Alara moved carefully through the palace halls, her eyes scanning every corner. Her hands still tingled with the energy of the spell she had performed the night before, and though the frost had receded, she could feel the pulse of the palace's magic, quiet but persistent. She had faced the curse, yet she knew that ancient power did not yield easily. It waited, watched, and sometimes tested those who dared to touch it. King Eric followed silently behind her. He had spent the morning inspecting the wards and protections that had been weakened over decades, but his thoughts often drifted to her. Alara, once timid and overlooked, now held the key to the kingdom's safety, and his respect and admiration. Every glance, every word, every moment they shared had begun to build something neither had expected: trust, understanding, and an unspoken bond. They reached the council chambers, where the board had gathered once more. Lord Raven and several other ministers eyed Alara with suspicion, murmuring quietly as the king entered. The room was tense. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. Eric's gaze swept over the council, sharp and commanding. "You questioned her presence yesterday," he began, his voice calm but unyielding. "And you dismissed her without reason. Today she has proven her value, her courage, and her loyalty. She is no longer just a girl in the shadows. She is the guardian of this palace." A hush fell over the council. Murmurs of dissent rose, but Eric raised a hand, silencing them. "This kingdom faces dangers unseen, and we must be prepared. She will remain, and her knowledge will guide us. That is final." Alara's heart raced, a mixture of fear and pride. She had been dismissed, humiliated, and ignored. Yet here she stood, recognized not only by the king but by the palace itself. Her quiet strength had been tested, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Yet even as the council reluctantly acknowledged her place, the palace whispered warnings that were unseen by all but her. Frost traces appeared faintly along the windows, and the walls hummed with faint energy. Something lingered, a remnant of the curse testing the boundaries of their victory. Alara turned to Eric, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. "The curse, it is not gone completely. It is bound to the palace and to me. If we are not careful, it may return." Eric's eyes softened and he reached out, taking her hand in his. "Then we prepare together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." The day passed with careful planning. Eric and Alara inspected the wards, reinforced protections, and studied the remaining signs of the curse. Alara guided him through the hidden chambers, revealing secret rooms and passages that had been lost to time. Each discovery strengthened their connection, and Eric found himself relying on her more than he ever expected. Her courage, intelligence, and intuition became indispensable, and he began to see her not as a shy girl dismissed by the board, but as a partner in both strategy and fate. As evening approached, the palace was quiet, the shadows long and still. Eric led Alara to the highest tower, overlooking the snow-covered kingdom. The view stretched for miles, the white landscape sparkling under the pale light of the setting sun. "You've changed everything," Eric said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "You've saved the palace, the kingdom, and you've changed me." Alara turned to him, her eyes wide. "Changed you?" she asked. Eric nodded. "I was always strong, always commanding, always alone. I trusted few and I feared the unknown. But you taught me something I had forgotten. Trust, patience, courage that does not roar but endures. You've shown me that strength can be quiet and that even kings must sometimes yield to guidance." Alara felt warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and a budding affection she had not expected. She had always been timid, shy, and overlooked, yet in the presence of this man, the Alpha King, she felt seen, valued, and understood. A sudden sound broke their moment. From the forest below, a chilling howl echoed through the air, sharp and haunting. Alara tensed, sensing the pulse of magic reacting to it. Though the curse had been contained, the forces of the kingdom were not yet fully at rest. Eric tightened his grip on her hand. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." The howl faded, but the warning remained. Alara knew that though the immediate danger was over, the past lingered, and the magic that had once been trapped in the palace was still part of her and part of Eric. Together, they had formed a bond that would be tested, strengthened, and relied upon in the days to come. That night, they returned to the chamber where the heart of the curse had pulsed. Alara placed her hand on the pedestal, feeling the faint glow of the crystal that had once held so much power. The energy was weaker now, gentle, contained, but it was still alive. "I will carry it," she said softly. "It is my responsibility. I was chosen for this, and I cannot ignore it." Eric knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. "You do not carry it alone. We share this burden and we share this victory. You have my trust, my strength, and my loyalty." For the first time, Alara allowed herself to truly believe in her own power and purpose. She was no longer the shy girl dismissed by the board. She was the guardian of the palace, the protector of the kingdom, and a companion to the king. In the following days, the palace began to heal. Frost no longer crept along the walls, shadows no longer whispered threats, and the corridors were filled with a quiet warmth that had been absent for generations. Eric resumed his duties with renewed vigor, but he did so with Alara by his side, consulting, guiding, and sharing in decisions. Their partnership became a legend whispered among the servants, the council, and the people, a story of courage, trust, and redemption. Even Lord Raven and the council could not ignore her now. Her influence, intelligence, and bravery had won their reluctant respect, though some still murmured behind closed doors. Yet Alara remained calm, her confidence growing with every passing day. She had faced shadows, confronted ancient magic, and stood tall beside the king. Nothing could shake her now. One evening, as snow fell softly over the kingdom, Eric and Alara stood on the balcony once more. The castle lights twinkled below, reflecting off the frozen streets like 1,000 tiny stars. Eric's hand found hers again, warm and steady. "You have changed this kingdom," he said, his voice gentle. "But more importantly, you have changed me. I see the world differently because of you." Alara smiled faintly, her cheeks tinged with color from the cold and the emotion. "And I have learned to believe in myself, not because the board said so, but because you trusted me and because I trusted myself." The palace seemed to sigh in quiet relief, the frost completely gone and the shadows receding into memory. The curse that had haunted generations was now contained, and the kingdom could breathe again. But beyond the walls of the palace, the forest whispered. Ancient magic, though tamed, always waited. Alara and Eric had faced the darkness, but they both knew the future held challenges yet unseen. Yet they were no longer afraid. Together, they could face anything. Eric drew her close, his forehead resting against hers. "No matter what comes," he whispered, "we face it together." Alara nodded, her heart full of courage, hope, and a quiet joy she had never known. The shy girl who had been dismissed on Christmas Day was no longer unseen. She had found her strength, her purpose, and a place at the side of the Alpha King. As the snow continued to fall, covering the kingdom in white silence, a sense of peace settled over the palace. The story of the shy girl and the Alpha King had reached a turning point, a chapter of triumph, trust, and newfound hope. Yet the magic of the world, like all great stories, hinted that adventure would come again. For now, however, the palace was safe, the bond between Alara and Eric unbreakable, and the kingdom's future secure in the hands of those brave enough to face the shadows and light alike.